This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland front of the lane, lob to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including Bally Sports Ohio, without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. The NBA Finals are, they're underway. We're 2 games deep. We are, of course, trying to counter-program them on today's podcast, but that means that the NBA season is coming to a close. At most, there are 5 games left of this season, which means we are in full-on off-season mode. Joining me today to discuss everything going on with the Cavs and what we have to look ahead for these next couple weeks is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Fighting a little bit of a cold, some scratchy throat issues, but I'm tough. I can make it. And if I stop talking midway through, it's because I'm starting to lose my voice.
Well, we appreciate you toughing it out, Carter. We tried to push this back a little bit, but we ran out of days. We ran out of days, and we got to get this podcast up. We got to get the people what they want. Before we dive into the meat of today's podcast, the Cavs coaching search is still ongoing. There were reports that they met with James Borrego earlier this week and Kenny Atkinson. Saw some reports, but no confirmation that, Mike Nori may be getting an interview later this week. Again, I don't have a lot of strong takes, but I do like that at least the candidates that are most visible, because we can't make an assumption that this is all of them. There's probably a whole lot more that don't even kind of enter the public sphere. But I like the names that have been listed so far. They're coaches that, have an offensive mind. My preference, because I'm a chicken, not because I think it's the right way to go, just because I'm a coward and risk adverse by nature, is to go with someone with some head coaching experience. So I probably, when I see, the list of potential candidates, I like Borrego and Kenny the most out of that. But, we're still without a coach when it comes to the Cavs.
Yeah, it's funny. I know everything, everything smart in my brain says don't have an opinion. I am starting to develop one, I think. I think I am pretty excited about the idea of James Borrego. Obviously, I think, I feel like I've gone through with this coaching search kind of the ups and downs of like, okay, we are entering a coaching search and there are no established names on the market. And I haven't really heard a lot of PR about any Jordi Fernandez, examples, was probably the hottest unproven name on the market.
Mm-hmm.
Budenholzer, probably the hottest proven name on the market, and both those guys are gone. So part of my brain was like, oh man, are we going to be able to find someone that is actually we can get excited about? Mm-hmm. And then, as it always happens, it's a there's only 30 jobs. There's better than 30 NBA head coaches in the world, from a talent perspective. And so you start hearing all these guys coming in, guys like Nori, Adelman, Borrego, Atkinson. You go, well, okay, I can see why any of these guys will make our team better or different in a way that different in a way that we'll learn a little bit more about what these guys can bring to the table. So ultimately I think I'm excited. I'm excited to see whoever they go with. I am actually most excited that they seem to really be following a process here. I think
that's the important point. Honestly, I think that's the most important point, that, you got an interview scheduled for this week, even if you feel really good about the Borrego interview and how that went, you're still going through the process, right? You're doing your due diligence. You're being thorough. I'm very glad that you brought that up.
Yeah. And it's the market isn't there is no strong candidate where you go, we can't do anyone but this. It must be this guy. I don't think that's where the market is right now. So there's
not a name that's won a playoff game.
Yeah,
to put a fine point on it. Yeah.
So I think really figuring out who's going to sell best on the vision, I think is really important, really valuable, and I'm glad they aren't getting themselves caught up in making a splash signing, or doesn't seem like that Lakers job looming is making this front office feel like they need to snatch someone up just to snatch them up. Like, it's like, hey, we're gonna operate on our timeline. This is a great job with a great young core. And by the way, it goes back to show you the fact that, like, you know, Windhorst goes on the radio today and pretty much roundly says that coaches think that the Cavs job is a better job than the Lakers job, you know, and that's
which goes back to your rant on the last podcast.
Almost like there's good players here.
There's no talent here, but people really covet the job.
Yeah. So like, I think like they are operating like a team, you know, much like that Kobe presser to start the offseason. I just feel like they're operating a team that isn't apologizing for the path they've taken. And as someone who has mostly liked the path they've taken, I'm cool with that. So I will say the Borrego thing, just the fact that he got those derelict Hornets teams to the play-in, to the 9-10 spot, winning up to 43 games in one of those seasons with not that much talent, not a particularly well-fitting roster, not a lot of positional depth, and they figured it out. He figured it out. He had 2 ball-dominant smaller guards and, you know, won games with them. He got squeezed really good offense out of those rosters.
One thing I like is, you know, having 3 players that average over 20 points per game. Like, that's, you know, that's a nice sign. And our buddies over at Real Cavs Fans, I saw that they tweeted out, you know, just kind of a head-to-head comparison of Borrego and Atkinson. And if you believe in kind of estimated wins and that sort of thing, wins above replacements, those Hornets teams overachieved more, given the talent there. Now, I don't put, just to put my cards on the table, I don't put a lot of stock in those kind of stats, those kind of above replacement value catch-all stats when it comes to basketball, because it's not baseball. But, you know, it's like you're talking about 2 coaches that got teams to overachieve, and I think that's a really important thing, particularly when you factor in that, you know, the overachieving was done on the offensive end of the floor, and you know, obviously 2 coaches that are very highly talked about too. So I, as I said, I'm risk adverse, so I'm always going to lean towards the experience. You're right. It's silly to kind of develop strong opinions, but it's going to be a little similar to, you know, the draft in general. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be an expert. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I will develop strong opinions based on very limited knowledge. And, you know, I think it's one of the areas where when we talk about the Cavs over the regular season, I wouldn't say we're experts, but we're people that put in a lot of hours and a lot of time thinking about this and, you know, diving into the data and whatnot. When it comes to coaching searches and drafts, we get to be a little bit of a dumb fan sometimes, and we can follow our hearts a little bit and be irrational with what we want to prioritize and what data points we want to put stock in.
Yeah, the one last thing I wanted to say about Borrego that I do find interesting about is during his tenure in Charlotte, he talked like a defense-first coach. That was kind of the message he sent, was defense, defense, defense. And didn't seem to be much of an offensive guy based on what you heard in pressers, and yet their defense was very, very poor. Now, I would argue a lot of that's based on personnel. They did not have guys who guarded the way he would have in Cleveland. But it's just an interesting little tidbit, I guess, I would say, is like the guy who talked more about defense ended up coaching a very offensively driven team, and he often made... And I would consider that a mark in his favor. It's like, hey, I'm a coach that wants to coach defense, but my best chance to win is PJ Washington of the 5 with this team. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just go ahead and play the minutes that give my team the best chance to win. So just a little interesting tidbit with him.
And it's not like they got much better defensively either after bringing back Steve Clifford. You know, he comes from the Popovich tree, so there's a lot of structure to both how they play offensively and defensively. And, you know, going back to our conversation last week, I think structure is really one of my kind of priorities when it comes to the Cavs. I'd like to see them be a little more versatile. I'd like to see the burden lessened on both Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland.
I'd like to see the players commit to that structure.
Absolutely, right, and you know, some of that obviously is buy-in, and we'll see how it translates. Anytime you're making a change like this, like, there is no guarantee that it's going to improve, right? Like, everything is a calculated risk at this point, but you know, all you can do is kind of go off of the data that's available to you. And what's, publicly available with a lot of these candidates so far is at least encouraging. And it's at least an interesting swing to take. I'm not going to sit here and assume that anything is going to get better, but, we're process over results a lot of the times. And I feel comfortable with at least the public parts of this process that we've been able to kind of hear through the media.
Yeah, unless they go completely out of left field with the hire, in which case I'll have to kind of reevaluate. I'm pretty sure no matter who they hire, I'll be pretty pleased with, because I know that they really did their diligence, and it seems
and
like,
honestly, if they do go left field, they did their diligence. So it would be an educated gamble at that point too.
Sure, but like this process, it would be what I would want to see. Even if you're pretty sure you know your guy, like you hold a lot of cards. You don't need to rush. And I like that. I like that they've done that.
Yeah, the very, very good points. Obviously, the other major component that we're going to be analyzing when it comes to the Cavs this season is how does the rest of it come together, right? There's reporting out there that the Cavs are not showing any real willingness to entertain offers when it comes to the core, and they want to run things back, and that's I know warms our hearts a little bit too, as people that fall in love and get invested with the guys that are on the team, right? Like, I'm always interested in figuring out how that works. And, we talked about the fit of the core on the last podcast. And before we really, dive into draft coverage, which I think we're going to do in depth next week, I will touch on it a little bit today, but I think the most important thing before we get into any of that is evaluating the needs that the Cleveland Cavaliers have when it comes to their supporting cast, because they're going to have opportunities to address that both through the draft. They're going to have opportunities to address that through free agency, and obviously, evaluate the options that are available on the trade market. But that's always a little bit trickier, because the skill sets and the types of talent that the Cavs probably need the most are the toughest to obtain. They are very rare, period, when you look kind of team to team, and teams that do have those guys, it's very, very hard to acquire, those kind of archetypal wings that I would make an assumption that that's the type of player that we would like to see.
Listen, man, I said I was interested in becoming the grit and grind Grizz. I didn't mean like this. The perpetual search for the big wing that can take you home.
Hey, they had Rudy Gay, man. Rudy Gay, even there, you have a guy that from an archetype standpoint, Rudy Gay is that perfect big wing, man. Like that is exactly what you wanted, but it just didn't work out.
He couldn't shoot. He wasn't a perfect fit at all.
Willing shooter.
But yeah, I mean, I do think it is going to be an interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot, Justin, because I feel like in our Discord, a little less on Twitter, but especially in our Discord, I've kind of been the one pounding my hands on the desk saying, I'm not trading a core 4 team member just to trade them, just because I'm not so sure. We talked about it on our last pod about how the lineup data, especially in the playoffs, doesn't really give you enough information to say, there's no easy thread to pull that says we must do this. So short of that data, I wasn't interested in trading one of the core 4 just to trade them. And, dealing from a position of weakness where you felt like you had to make a move. So that does beg the follow-up question that I haven't really spent enough time considering until now, which is, well, if you don't trade the core 4, how much are you trying to change? Like, if the top 4 out of your 8 or 9 man rotation aren't that different, and pretty much your whole roster, sans Isaac Okoro, is locked up to a deal, is, how much are you looking to kind of juggle around positions 5 through 9 in your rotation, whether by benching certain guys and giving other guys more run, whether it's a big splash, whether it's trading, like you mentioned, like, it's like, what's the right amount of change if you are going to bring back your top 4 guys?
Yeah, and honestly, I think there's going to be an evaluation to see what's available on the trade market. Like, I think that it's going to include, doing due diligence when it comes to what's available for the core as well, right? But like I said, those types of players that you would covet aren't, they're not common in the NBA to begin with. When you talk about, big wings that are able to provide 3-point shooting, defense, and playmaking, like those guys are superstars. Those guys are Paul George, right? Like it's just, and also finding one that aligns with the timeline, kind of understanding that Evan Mobley is still a few years away from his prime. It's a tough needle, and team building in the NBA and really in any sport, but I think it's particularly true for the NBA. It's all about what compromises you're willing to make. You may have an idea of what type of archetypes you would ideally want to have alongside your core players, but it's tough to find those guys. There are no perfect fits. You're going to have to sacrifice certain aspects of your team and certain aspects of lineups in order to get as much talent on the court as possible. And often when it comes down to the NBA, it's about getting as much talent on the court as possible and maximizing that talent that you do have. And I think that ties into the conversation I'd like to have today, which is, well, how do we best maximize the talent that's available to them? Which is, I guess the first question that comes there is, after 2 years of seeing this group together, what skill sets do you still feel like the Cavs need the most when it comes to bringing the best out of this core?
It's so tough because I feel like the last year that what I would call like a lack of consistent commitment to an identity, to structure, it kind of warped the experience, because so much was just being generated from the guards at the point of attack. So like, I think that's one of the reasons I was so juiced on bringing in a new coach. By the time we wrapped up the year, was that I did just kind of want to see, how much of the shortcomings of the offense right now can be just fixed strictly by running and committing to a different sort of offense a little bit more consistently. So that is my kind of my disclaimer a little bit. But on both ends of the floor, man, again, I really don't like how small the team is. And I know this is going to be one of our probably one of our bigger arguments of the summer, because I don't think you care as much. But I just see, especially, I feel like this is a team that masquerades as a big team because they play the two bigs in the front court, but at every other position they are positionally small. And that's for their starters. Darius, Donovan, Max are all, I would say, smaller than a lot of their peers at the 1, 2, and the 3. And Jared is as big as most of his peers at the 5 and smaller than a lot of those guys, by the way. Yeah. And then even on the bench, like guys like Craig Porter Jr. are small. Isaac Okoro plays a lot of the 3, but he's really 6'4", 6'5". Karras has decent size, but isn't a excessively physical player.
Yeah.
Dean is okay for a 4, a slightly smaller 4, and they don't play a backup 5. So, like Niang, also a bit of a undersized 4 as well. And it's like, if you're they're just small at every position. So like, I think one thing that I really want to see with this offseason is like, okay, if you're not 100% sure with your core 4, build in some structure to give you some looks that you can really succeed with, one of those guys not playing. If you are going to long-term figure out like where everyone's going to plug in, I think getting a little bigger makes it easier to downshift every now and then. Because I just think every time I watch the team play with only Mobley or only Allen on the floor, I think, man, we're asking Mobley or Allen to do a lot of work for everyone else. And when you do switch, when you're playing these positional, it just feels such a far cry, Justin, from the Markkanen, Mobley, Allen lineups that they were running, where where you had 2 7-footers on the floor pretty much at all times. So even if Mobley or Allen got pulled out of the paint on a switch with the other one sitting on the bench, you still had something on the back line. There was a lot of Max Strus fighting guys off on the dunker spot, or Donovan Mitchell fighting guys off on the dunker spot, and like that physical disadvantage really bothered me against Orlando and against Boston, who isn't positionally huge at the guard position, but they're so big at the forward position that I felt like you really felt it for the Cavs. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, I appreciate your answer, and keep that voice warm. If you need to, like, it's like going to the exercise bike when you come out of the game. If you need to just kind of mumble under your breath a little bit to keep it going, I'm fine with that. I just find that so interesting because I'm actually more in agreement with you than you probably think, but I find it interesting because last offseason we were talking about, hey, I'm willing to sacrifice some size to get that skill set in this house, right? Like that's our, hey, we can get a. You can get a Max Strus because we need movement shooting, and I will take someone that's, maybe more of a 4 but provides movement shooting, or someone that's maybe more of a 2 but provides movement shooting, and we can play them at the 3. We were valuing the skill set more than the archetype, and I think this is trying to find that balance, right, between getting that size, getting the skill positions in. As much as I want to add size, I think the need when I'm thinking about what I would like to see the Cavs add in this offseason, and I don't know if it's in-house, like it's possible, as I say this, it's possible that the ability to do so is already on the roster, but the offensive scheme was too rigid. I honestly don't know. But I think that they need to add playmaking. I think it's too predictable when you look at this Cavs roster, who the play initiators are and who the play finishers are. And I think especially when you go further down in the lineup, like I actually think Strus did a good job as a playmaker. I think he made a leap in that regard. And, honestly, from a playmaking standpoint, that starting lineup, like Darius, we know, is a savant. He's a great playmaker. Donovan, I think, had his best playmaking season. Strus had his best. Mobley, Allen, I think all 5 of them are very good playmakers for their position. But as you stagger, as you go further down the lineup, I think it just became too defined of this person's going to initiate the offense and everybody else is out here and they're going to be play finishers. Whereas when you played Boston in that series, all 5 guys could initiate the offense, right? You can run a 2-man game with just almost any position on the court. And I think that offensive versatility and their ability to generate looks from a variety of positions really makes their offense more difficult to defend. And I think that's the main thing in the playoffs, because you look at these finals, and probably with me saying this right now, every team's going to shoot 80% tonight, and it's going to be an offensive, amazing game. But like those teams are shooting like crap in the finals, but they're still able to, generate good enough looks. They're able to generate offense in other ways and find ways to compensate for that. Whereas with the Cavs, like if the initiators are creating good looks and those shots just aren't falling, or teams can, really throw double teams at Donovan or trap Darius and kind of force them to be uncomfortable, there's no other option that you can go to reliably that's going to get the defense out of kind of whatever their game plan is. And I think that it's just a lack of playmaking. And I think that gets exacerbated when you play the best teams in the league. Because when you play some of these teams, I think we've seen Darius be too passive. I think we've seen Mobley be too passive. And when you play those type of defenses, Donovan's playmaking vision gets narrow. The blinders come on a little bit, and he sees everyone else struggling, and he tries to, elevate the team with his own individual scoring. And I just feel like adding playmaking and adding some juice to the offense and initiation at other positions, to me, that's almost more important, because I think that their shooting talent on this team is just getting to those quality shots and generating them at a consistent enough rate in a variety of ways that can get these guys that all have reputations as shooters to be more confident and more reliable shooters over the course of a season and playoffs.
Yeah, I think defining playmaking is probably pretty important here, because one thing that you probably don't want more of is more dribblers. Right. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but like, I don't want more Karras has brought a lot of value to this team, but a lot of what Karras does is a little bit on his own schedule, on his own rhythm, I don't want to go get another lead guard, even if they're
Jordan
like on
Clarkson.
the wing, that is just gonna take more control of the offense. So I find it to be a pretty fine line here. That and this is the hard part of team building, because like I'm looking for size that can still hang skill wise, and you're looking for playmaking that can help raise the team's floor and ceiling without taking away control from Darius, Donovan, Evan, and reps from Darius, Donovan, Evan that ultimately are going to drive the team. So like I'm going to throw out a name to you just to get a sense of like, is that the playmaking you have in mind?
Mm-hmm.
Like a guy like Nick Batum, maybe not Nick Batum, but like, is that what you're talking about in terms of guy who can catch it and dribble, run a pick and roll, but isn't going to be a high touch guy? Or do you have a different archetype of player in mind that I'm not hearing?
I think I want a little bit more explosiveness. Like, I understand.
Just name an archetype. They don't have to be a free agent or like a player or an example. They don't have to be someone who we can actually get. But who do you have in mind?
Let's go with a name that's been on the trade market that we've liked a lot in the past, but I think both of us have trepidation regarding in Brandon Ingram, of, you know, a big wing that's able to generate offense. And we worry about that now. And you know, we've had these conversations privately, but like worrying about that alongside a Garland, Mitchell, and Mobley when you want to get those guys developmental reps and, you know, there's only one ball and you want Mobley to improve as a playmaker. And maybe that's something that becomes more feasible. Like maybe we have a concern with that archetype based on what we've seen over these last 2 years, but that's less of an issue if you bring in someone like a James Borrego that comes from that Popovich school of coaching where, you know, I don't want touches to go beyond like 2 seconds. Like,
I just think that player, that version of player is way too good for someone we're going to be able to get.
I'm talking like a scaled down version of that archetype, but just because, you know, we're podcasting now and I even someone, man, like it's at a smaller position, but like what Derek White's able to provide for the Celtics, right? Like
these guys are. Here's the thing, bro, and like this is what my brain is going to when we're having this conversation for both of us is maybe you're gonna have to find a road to a 2-for-1 from an asset perspective. Maybe not 2 players, but you might have to go try to chase something at a transactional level that consolidates, you know, 2 or 3 pieces, whether it's picks, players, whatever, into one, because the kinds of guys we want are not guys you can get even for the mid-level.
Yeah, my brain's going to you know, high with the names. I think it's weakening my point, but here's one: that unrestricted free agent Kelly Oubre, like someone like that, where, you know, it's similar to Karras, where, you know, sometimes he's going to go rogue and he's going to generate his own offense, but he is someone that can bend the defense. And I just think that ability with size is really, really damn important. It's why I was enamored with him in the free agency process last year, because, you know, even though you're making some compromises there, that's someone that is able to manipulate a defense. He's able to, you know, they're cheating over on Darius, they're cheating over on Donovan, they're hedging, they're trapping, they're blitzing. That means 2 guys are basically being assigned to one player, and I want to have a front court player that is able to capitalize on that. So, you know, Kelly Oubre would be a name kind of in that archetype that I would have some interest in.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough to go to like again. I've said this more than once, and I'll say it again. This is a huge offseason for Kobe in the front office to go win some transactions. Like, I don't think that this roster needs someone to hit a single or a sack fly. Like, Kobe needs to hit some doubles and triples. A home run would be lovely. But, like, I do think, like, you know, I spent the entire season talking about pumpkin insurance. And you know, that just didn't really play out in the postseason. We were back to really only having 7.5 guys we could really count on. Now it's better from like the 5.5 we had the year prior, but not enough. And like,
and then we started dropping starters.
Yeah, and of course that, you know, that makes things even harder. But like, I think that there is a degree to which, like, you might need one or two more B plus type players, you know, one or two more Derek Whites, PJ Washingtons, Daniel Gaffords, guys that you're just sure can be out there, you know, no matter what, no matter, you know, where maybe you have a rough game or two, but you're not just going to be a no chance, you know, like I thought Strus, even though Strus didn't shoot well, like I at no point felt like Strus didn't belong on the floor in the postseason.
No, I agree.
You know, I felt like we needed Strus a little more than I think would be ideal. Like I think on the player need power rankings, it would be nice if he could be knocked down like one rung. But like, you know, like more guys at least at that level, I think is going to be really important for this roster because I think we've kind of seen the limitations of the specialists.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it is tough to find A+ help, and I think that's why we're so appreciative with the help that we get from Zoom. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. Carter, I'm really happy with that point you made there about kind of finding that consistent help because, you know, I dove into kind of the staggering combinations that we had with the core over the last 2 seasons. And, you know, I think the follow-up research that needed to happen there. And, you know, I really appreciate the listeners that reached out, that enjoyed the podcast and, you know, added to the conversation, and particularly, you know, the ones in the Discord that, you know, built off of those points. But I wanted to dive into who most frequently is there with these guys when we're staggering. And the thing that struck me is, and you know, some of this is tied to injuries, but the just total number of possessions that we get, there's not a large sample with any one group. And I think continuity is so important when it comes to basketball because you need to have that second nature understanding of what the guys you're out there, what their tendencies are, where you need to cut, where you need to be. And, you know, just looking kind of up and down those different combinations, the ones that played together the most rocked. Like Garland and Mobley, the unit that they played the most together with is Karis LeVert, Isaac Okoro, and George Niang. That lineup was a plus 22.5 net rating this year, and that was 236 possessions. That's phenomenal. There was not another pairing with Mobley and Garland this season that played more than 50 possessions. Like, that's simply not enough. And again, that ties to health. But I think that also just ties to, you know, trying to find out combinations that work, trying to find the support players that work. Because the other two most used lineups over the last 2 years are LeVert, Jetty, and Love, and LeVert, Okoro, and Jetty. And both like that's nuts. Like these are guys that are not on the team. And even when you look into, okay, like Mitchell and Mobley, we talked about how that lineup data is not good when it's just the two of them out there. There is not a group of 3 players that have played with Mitchell and Mobley that have played 100 possessions with them over the last 2 years combined. The most is 88 possessions, Strus, LeVert, and Niang. And that lineup rocks. It's a plus 24.1. Like, so it's all these other kind of mishmash combinations that don't really get to play together a whole lot that don't perform well. And I think that's a really, really important thing to point out, and trying to find these role guys that you can consistently find if you're keeping this core together. Finding role players that can stay on the court consistently, that you're not making so many compromises or trying to figure out on a game-to-game basis what they're going to bring to the table like Jetty was back in the day. And, you know, finding those combinations that work, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah. I want to ask you, you mentioned the guys that, you know, take a little bit off the court and as much as they add, or, you know, like how, you know, do you think the team is over-indexed on specialists?
I don't think so. I think that is something that you could take the result and work backwards towards. But when you look at players that were available to them in the draft, when they brought in the guys that were acquired by the draft, and when you look at the free agents that were brought in, they're kind of like the best and most versatile options, right? Like I think, you know, the best shooters on last year's market were Max Strus and George Niang. They brought in, you know, the shooting talent, and I think Strus showed that he was more versatile than we expected. George Niang had a very tough season, but he was driving more than I expected. He was showing something new in his game. I love George, but it was a tough season for him. But I don't think they're going into this saying, hey, we're going to bring in specialists. Everyone's going to have these rigid, really defined roles, and then we're going to work from there. I think whether it's guys not getting enough of an opportunity to spread their wings, or the rigidity of the offense, I think. I think both of those could be factors.
That is my take, to be honest, is like, I'm not sure if the team has over-indexed on specialists or not, but I will say that I think the spots a lot of them were put in were, I think we'll actually, here's what I'll say. I think we'll know by next year if they've over-indexed on specialists, if they don't do big changes with the role players on the roster. If we see Isaac Okoro involved in the offense and running secondary pick and rolls and cutting through, then we'll go.
Isn't that the name at the top of the list?
Of course,
when you talk about being put in a box.
Of course it is. And I think we'll know real quick if it's like Isaac was, in a too limited of a role, too specific of a box, or Isaac is too much of a specialist, same goes with guys like Sam Merrill, same goes with guys like George Niang, same goes even with a guy like Evan Mobley, who I thought kind of became mostly a dive and finish guy. He was not doing nearly as much playmaking from the elbow, I felt like, this year as he was last year. I don't know if the numbers support that, but
particularly after the surgery, I would say.
Yep. So I think we'll know a lot based. I'm not sure what the answer is there. My instinct is to want more guys who can do more stuff, with the ball and without. Nick Batum's name wasn't an accident, because they really didn't have a guy like that on the roster last year. Maybe Strus is the closest parallel there in terms of a switchy defender that can play make, that can defend, that doesn't really take anything off the table. A little bit of a streaky shooter, but guys still guard him. I don't know if they had enough Batums on the roster. Now, you could have too many of those guys, and I think we're seeing that a little bit with the Mavericks right now in their series with Boston, where it's they have 3 or 4 guys who get on the floor that you kind of guard and that can kind of play make, but they're not able to do it at a high enough level to hurt a balanced defense like Boston. Whereas the Cavs, I thought, at times look better against Boston's defense. So
I don't know, Carter, if you have a bad shooting game in a small sample size of a playoff series, I think you just got to come to the conclusion that you're just not built as a playoff performer. I just think this Kyrie Irving guy,
not sure he's got it.
2 bad shooting games against Boston. How can you
can I quickly aside on Kyrie?
Yes.
I was driving to work the other day, and I was thinking it's kind of interesting that even though this Boston team isn't nearly as good as that 2016 or 2017 Warriors team, it is interesting that even though those Warriors teams were even better defensively than this Boston team,
Agreed.
They weren't built to stop Kyrie the way these Boston teams are. They had their best option on Kyrie was an out of position Klay Thompson chasing him around. They didn't have straight up guard defenders like Derek White and Drew Holiday are. And just an interesting thing that I was noticing. What?
Bit of a party pooper. I know it's one of the things we don't like to talk about, but Andre Iguodala having a very bad back in that 2016 finals and being stiff
but he was guarding LeBron. I don't care about that. They weren't putting him on Kyrie.
That would have been an option that you could have put him on Kyrie in theory. But
I don't think they would have.
I agree with your point.
I don't think they would have. I think they needed him on LeBron, and Harrison Barnes was not going to have the same level of success consistently. No. So all I'm saying is it is an interesting little thing where it's I get why Kyrie's missing shots, but dude, Zach Lowe mentioned it on his podcast with Steve Jones. Maybe it was actually with Wendy, I can't remember, after game 2, but there was a possession where Kyrie tried to take the ball in transition and he was going to attack. He was like, I've got a chance. I've got some space, and White just stoned him, chest to chest at him. And I was like, oh man, this is not this is not good. So like anyway.
I also mix up Steve Jones and Wendy from time to time.
Yeah, very, very similar analysts. But yeah, I going back to the fact that like I just you can overload on specialists, you can overload on generalists. I'm not sure exactly where the Cavs balance should be, but I would like to see a few more options that trend towards the generalist side.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because we can have, gripes and grievances about, were guys put into too much of a box. But I think one of the things, and this is particularly true this year, I think it was true 2 years ago, maybe not as much the year prior, where we won 50 games. The lack of continuity, and with guys missing so much time, I just feel like with an NBA team, you want to set up a base of what you're doing and then build upon that base. And I feel like that was just an opportunity that was robbed of them in this year in particular, where if you're just trying to find stuff that works and you're just trying to keep your head above water, it might just be, hey, you might have 5 things that you're really comfortable doing on the court, but we're just sticking with 1 and 2 because we're down guys. You're tired, you're hurt, you're trying to get comfortable again. So we're going to, kind of limit the playbook to some extent. So, I just, in the interest of fairness, I think that that's a distinct possibility because, yeah, like when Evan Mobley's trying to get reintegrated in the offense, you're not all of a sudden going to be, you're trying to reestablish what he does well rather than, all right, let's kind of spread your wings a little bit and try things out. And, when you're trying to get Darius Garland back to his regular form, you're not going to play around with as many Isaac Okoro developmental reps. So, it is a very tough balance. And again, it comes back to the push and pull of having a young team that has a lot of expectations in the short term, but also has a long-term vision that you want to have, and development has to be part of that priority, and that has to be part of that process. So it really isn't an easy thing, but I overall, I agree with you. I think size that can do stuff is one of my priorities, and I think that ties into probably my draft crush right now, in not having done a lot of research, which is Pacome Didet. I didn't do a lot of research on how to pronounce his name, but 18-year-old French wing. I love this guy. He's got the size. He's got a nice, fluid, compact jumper. Good athlete. Raw, didn't put up great scoring numbers or anything like that, but you can just kind of see the vision. You can see the athleticism, and my concern with him, or really anybody that we draft, is these guys are going to need to take some time to develop. And do we have those developmental reps at our disposal? Are we going to be able to give that to them? Is it going to come with a charge? Like, these are all kind of questions that you have to balance.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you, because I think we both really, over the last week and a half, have finally kind of started doing some draft prep. Before we dive in, and I have not watched it just yet. But I wanted to ask you, what is your just general takeaway on the draft quality from what you've seen, and your general vibes hanging at 20 right now?
I think you're going to laugh at this, but a lot of specialists, a lot of guys that I don't think are very multifaceted in terms of what they can bring to the table, but guys that can fill kind of individual roles. And I think looking at the talent pool that's available, there's a lot of compromises that you're going to have to make in order to bring in a skill set, right? Like, a lot of the wings are 6'5", 6'6", right? Kind of in that Isaac Okoro, Max Strus range when it comes to height and wingspan and length overall. There's just not a ton that I feel like when I look at the guard and wing talent guys, a lot of them seem undersized to me. There's other options available, like you look at a Tristan Da Silva or Tyler Smith that have a lot of length, but I look at kind of their athletic profile and their ability to give juice offensively and self-create, and I say, no, you're a power forward. Like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to play at a 4 even if your body type isn't yet ready for it. Like, I think offensively that's where the skill set comes. And when I say the skill set I want to add is guys that have some juice, that can bring some life to the offense, that can bring some pop. I want athleticism. I want length, and I'm not seeing a ton of that. And I think that's why someone like Didet is interesting to me.
Yeah, I think my general takeaway is one, this draft is not very good. You know, I even at the top, looking at guys like Ron Holland, and you know, there's some stuff that you're like, man, would you be a top 10 prospect in a stronger draft? I'm not sure. You look at, you know, and I do think even, and the other thing is, the Cavs just haven't picked around 20 in a long time. You know, like it's one of those things, and we did this when they were at 14.
Ochai's kind of the range.
No, 14 is very different than 20 to me, man. You know, being in the Dalton Connect kind of range compared to the Furphy, Filipkowski, Bub Carrington range is like, I think there is a pretty solid drop off, as far as I can kind of see, and so. It is an adjustment. It's an adjustment to say, like, you're probably like, I'm not expecting who we take at 20 to make the rotation as currently constructed to start the year. And I think what you're looking for is, like, you have to kind of make a talent play here. You have to just, if I'm running the team, I am just trusting my scouts and saying, who's the best guy? And unless their fit is just so atrocious that I don't expect to see a road to them being able to develop in my organization, I'm probably going to take a shot. Because, yeah, you look at a guy like, you know, Johnny Furphy, who's probably one of my favorites right now, because I do think he is a proper small forward that's 6'9". You know, not a lot of self-creation juice, but a good off-ball cutter and transition finisher and things like that. But, like, you are making real concessions. This is a guy who averaged like 1.5 assists per game on the wing. You know, truly a play finisher if there ever was one right now.
That is a specialist, my guy.
And like, so like, I think that's my initial takeaway is I'm just not, I would caution anyone from falling desperately in love. There are a lot of drafts where you find starters in the 20 range. I would be very pleasantly surprised if that were the case. I'm hoping that they find someone in the 8th, 9th man kind of category with this pick. And if they pick someone that makes the rotation, I would say that's a big win for that player.
Yeah, and I would say that's a win if they make the rotation, not this upcoming season, but the following season. Like, I think that would be a very good outcome for this pick if they do in fact make it.
Can I yes and that a little bit?
Yes.
The other thing would be nice is if they pick someone and they did decide to make a consolidation trade where they go a 2-for-1. If that person is good enough to work their way in, if an opportunity arises, you know, because I do think there's a difference there. Between just supplanting an established 9-man rotation and they made a 2-for-1 and Johnny, you're up. Like, you got to go be our 9th man now. Are you ready? Like, that I think is a reasonable expectation for this pick. It is like someone who shows enough to be able to get in. Now, if they go Omega Project, you know, with the pick, a guy like, you know, Tyler Smith out of G League Ignite that I cannot believe is down at 30 in a draft like this.
I really like him too.
I don't know what I'm missing. Why a guy that has that physical profile, that size, that touch, is hanging at the fringe of the first round on ESPN's big board. But if you take a guy like that, like, okay, I get that you're probably going to have a little bit of a different curve. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, you know, like, it's going to be interesting to get a sense of, like, are they just going to take a wing and just be pot committed? We're going to take a 3 or a 4 because everyone says we got to get bigger. Or are they going to, how wide is their perspective going to get? You know, ESPN, I think, is currently mocking Bub Carrington out of Pittsburgh. And I think a lot of fans would be ready to fall out of their chair if the Cavs take a point guard with their only first round pick in the next 2 years.
I mean, especially as a Ty Jerome guy, I'm not here for this. And a CPJ guy. I love both of those guys. But I think, you know, I mentioned this on the last podcast, but I think in general you have to take best player available. If someone that you believe is a tier above the rest of the group falls to you, you have to take them. Like, that's the responsible decision. But if it's a bunch of guys within the same tier, you have to draft who you feel most confident has a runway with your team. And, you know, who you feel most confident in your ability to develop them and to maximize what they have in terms of talent. And for me, you know, I think the biggest openings are small forward and power forward, because you need to have a power forward. I'm okay with guys like De Silva and Tyler Smith. As much as I like what Dean Wade can provide, you know, health has been a concern. Durability has been a concern. Confidence has been a concern. If you can find a guy that gives you a little more versatility, allows you to shift down to playing, you know, a 3-4 there, a Tobias Harris type at the power forward position, like that's something that's attractive to me. I'm into that. I'm fine using draft capital on that position, and then, you know, looking at the trade market, looking at the free agency market to find that small forward. But you know,
what do you think about Khalil Ware? Have you dug on him yet?
Not a ton. Like, you know, he's got some, you know, potential as a shooting big.
I don't think his potential is as a shooting big. I think if you look at the mid-range numbers, they are really, really bad, and the free throw percentage is not good either. And the 3-point volume is not very high. But with that said, Derek Lively had the reputation coming out of high school as like, he's going to be a stretch big. He's going to be a stretch five. And he got to Duke and couldn't shoot. And over the back half of the year, he was like, how about I just dunk? I'm a monster. I'm a freak. How about I just dunk? And like, I do wonder if that might be Ware's future. And like, you know, here's my question is, are you okay with the Cavs taking a 5 at 20?
I would prefer not to. In theory, I'm okay with it, because as you mentioned, like, it's not like they've had kind of that consistent backup 5. I'd still like to see Evan Mobley get the majority of those backup 5 minutes. If you're assuming
again, I don't think this person's going to crack the rotation no matter who it is.
I think the 5. Funny thing is, a 5 might have a better chance if they just kind of have true size. The one exception being Zach Edey, who I just don't like. I'm sorry. Like, I have Canadian bias, but this is one of those areas where, you know what, maybe Canadian big men, with the exception of Tristan Thompson, I'm just out on, because I was not an Anthony Bennett guy at all. Yeah, my preference would be not to, just because I think, you know, I think the replacement value conversations too frequently gets applied to high level players like a Jared Allen. When you're talking about like backup bigs, replacement value is easy to find. You can find a 7-footer. I can go out and I can sign Plumlee this offseason for a portion of my mid-level exception and fill that role. Like, you can get a body out there. What's your face?
I don't think they've
explain your face.
I don't think they've had an exceptionally good time finding that body.
Hey, they did find Hardenstein for a little bit.
4 years ago.
It was fun. Yeah,
4 years ago.
But again, if they brought in,
I'm just saying, it hasn't been easy. And here's the thing: if you're not 100% sure about the Jared Allen, Evan Mobley pairing long term, like, it might be worth exploring some different archetypes at the end of your rotation.
I think if you want to spend resources to bring in a backup 5, you can do so. I don't think that's been high on the priority list. I don't think it's.
I'm not saying they should. I'm just saying
we've got to, like, I don't think they've been trying and striking out. I think they just haven't prioritized adding a backup 5.
I hear you, and I'm not making the argument that they should. I think it's probably the last position I would want to prioritize, but like, if their draft room loves Ware, because like, he's like the only guy that I'm seeing in that range where people are like, yeah, he could be a starter someday. Like, he's got the kind of profile. He was an elite high school recruit.
And if they believe he's a tier above the rest of the group that's available, you do take best player available, even if it's from a trade standpoint, because, you know, if it's, hey, we really, you know, if you draft Ware and he doesn't play for the Cavs, and let's say, you know, that is the perception that, hey, this can be a someday starter, he's not going to lose value by not playing. There are going to be teams out there that say, hey, we had a high draft grade on this guy. We believe that he could be a potential starter. He's buried behind Mobley. He's buried behind Allen, and we can go out there and he can be part of a trade package. That, just from an asset management standpoint, if that is your belief that he's a tier above, I can understand the argument for it.
Doesn't it seem like a great trade back year if you're the Cleveland Cavaliers? Because you look at the guys that are hanging around 20 on mocks. A lot of them are imperfect fits, especially there are guys I like. I love Furphy. I don't like guys but there are guys I just don't like for this team. I don't really like De Silva for this team. I don't like Edey for this team. I don't like Filipowski for this team. I don't really love Khalil Ware or Isaiah Collier for this team. A lot of these guys on the big board hanging around 18 to 25, 6 of them I don't really want. And then you look near the end of the draft, at the end of the big board, guys like Dedet, Tyler Smith, not a big Bobby Clintman guy from my early review, but we'll see. Deron Holmes, who, by all reports might have a promise based on the fact that he pulled out of every draft workout. But there are a lot of guys.
He's going to find a Holmes.
Yeah. God. There are a lot of guys near the end of the first that I think are interesting. And for an asset poor team like the Cavs, you might say, none of these guys are great fits, but we really like guys near 28, 29. Might be a really good opportunity. And normally I'm not a big proponent of trading down, but that's normally trading down from 8 to 20. I'm not sure it's as big of a deal dropping for 20 to 27 or 28 in this draft.
Yeah. I think similar to the roster, I expect them to evaluate all options. I saw KOC got very poorly aggregated, where he had a podcast where he was just kind of throwing out hypotheticals and things that he thought, and then it was aggregated as a report that the Cavs are trying to trade up because people are terrible when it comes to aggregation. But even if they're I would expect them to be calling teams to see what would it cost to trade up. I would expect them to call teams to see what can we gain from an asset standpoint to trade back. I would expect them to see what's available if they were to trade out entirely. What
do you have any crushes? Guys that you're like, oh, if he fell or they went up and grabbed him?
Honestly, I've only been reviewing the 15 to 30 range on boards. I haven't looked at any of the lottery talents. So a trade up, I would be completely out of my depth and I would embarrass myself. So I have absolutely no crushes outside of,
I got one.
My reach.
I got one.
Tell me.
Dalton Connect. A 23-year-old prospect is normally not near the top of my what if they fell or what if they went up and got him rankings, but he's got a weird journey, dude. He was playing JUCO for 2 years and then played at Northern Kentucky for 2 years before going to Tennessee and being the best scorer in the nation. A very weird route, an off the a little Strusian, but I think with a little extra size. He's got a 6'9" wingspan, a little bit of better athlete than Max, a freaking winner. I don't know, man. That's my one draft crush of ooh, if only they were at 14 or 13, because I don't think he's going to go top 10. And if he does, it just kind of goes to show you where people feel about this draft. But he's the one guy that I'm he would be fun.
Hey, if you can see me looking down, it's because I'm Googling. I see that he's Garland's age. Interesting.
Yes, he is old.
He's old,
as is Tristan Da Silva. There are some olds in this draft.
Want to know one that's really, really young and is only 18 years old? Dedet.
Baby. I'm gonna literally, as soon as we're done, I'm gonna watch that guy because I haven't seen anything from him yet.
I am expecting you to message me and for you to be in, because I think I know your type. But I think
I am very defendable. The people I'm gonna love.
Yeah. Going back to whether it's free agency, whether it's the draft, I think adding versatility, adding reducing the predictability of what we do offensively, I think is a real priority. I'd like to bring up stats that support my arguments. I also think it's important that, bringing up data when it doesn't support the argument. One of the things I was going to point out when I look at kind of these staggering lineups, When you look at, Garland and Mobley or Mitchell and Allen or any other combination of that, LeVert is like the one that's in all of these because obviously he's basically plays starter minutes coming in off the bench. And I was going to bring up the point of, hey, Garland and Mitchell, they're going to create opportunities for everybody on the court. But with Karras, he's a bit of a dump off merchant. He's going to be looking for the roller as a big. And you know what? I was wrong. I think he's the classic example of the stats versus eye test when it comes to Karis LeVert, because when you look at assist opportunities generated, 47% of the assist opportunities he generates are 3-point attempts. That is higher than Donovan Mitchell at 45%, and that's higher than Darius Garland at 40%. Karis LeVert be spraying it out there. I feel like maybe that happens more on the perimeter rather than driving kicks. I just don't recall a ton of driving kicks, but you know what? Sometimes the data doesn't back up what I'm seeing. Maybe, the bias leaks into everything that we see, whether we like it or not, positive and negative. And that's one of those areas where, you know what? I had maybe a bit of a blind spot.
I thought Karras got better as a playmaker this year in general. And the numbers show it. He had, he averaged 6.4 assists per 36. Last year he was 4.6. He was, I thought in general, he had a better year passing. I think the critique, I think the reason the eye test doesn't line up is I thought Karras was at his best this year when the team was playing aimless basketball and he just was decisive. But it was still kind of on his own schedule,
Which again highlights the need for structure. I think this is a team that just needs structure offensively, quicker decision making. One of the signature kind of characteristics of that Mitchell and Allen stretch was it felt like the team was playing faster than it was before, even though they were playing slower, but they were more decisive with what they were doing. And I think some of that, we mentioned at the time, I think that comes down to, hey, we don't have other guys. Like if Donovan's kicking me the ball and I have a somewhat open three, I'm just going to take this because if I don't, we're not getting a good look on this possession. So
what remains weird about Karras? I know this isn't a Karras pod, but you went there, so whatever. I'm gonna jump in.
It's a supporting cast pod.
Yeah,
Karras is a very important part of that.
The mid range never got better. He still shot 38% from 10 to 16, 37% from 3 to 10. Way below kind of his career averages there.
We're missing out on some mid range. I think there's meat on the bone. There's opportunities in the mid range. I think whether it be Darius pulling up, whether it's other guys kind of finishing more efficiently there. I think reducing the predictability of, we're either going to take, we were the ultimate 3 or rim team when it came to field goal attempts. That is the Cavs shot profile. I think making it a little less predictable is going to make the job harder for the defense. And, that's one of those areas, as much as we talk about Darius taking more threes, I'd love to see him come off some of those screens and, all right, I've got a shooting pocket here in the mid range, just take them. Because if he's dribbling in from the 3-point line, especially because he reduced the number of floaters he was throwing this year, he's either going to loop under the basket and throw a pass and sometimes, leave his feet on those opportunities, or he's going to attempt the layup. And that just makes the shot blocking timing and everything, the job of the defender, so much easier. So, that's an area I'd like to see him improve in particular.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Again, so much of this is like chicken or the egg. How much of it was the system? How much of it was the belief in the system? How much is that going to change? Or are they just gonna, or are we going to be like, if they do run back a very similar roster, are we going to be like, they shouldn't have done that? A lot of this is going to be so driven by what they're running on the court as compared to just changing the personnel out. Yeah.
They're going to have more data points than we do. And, it's going to be very, very interesting. A thing that they've kind of has characterized these last few years is, a a confidence in what they're doing internally and not really letting the outside noise impact the decision making. And I think that has been a real asset with this team. We will dive into the draft more. Carter will give his updated takes on my draft crush on the next podcast. Big thanks to everyone that tuned in live on YouTube. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of the review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.